Product manager, project manager, product owner. What do these people do? What is the difference? How do they help software engineering? How should they work together? That's what we're going to talk about today on Product Driven. Me and Jerel have a great conversation you don't want to miss about demystifying how all these people should work together and why they're important. To survive and thrive, you must adopt a product-driven mindset. And we're back for another episode of Product Driven. This is your host, Matt Watson. Today, I'm very excited to be joined by Jerel, who works for us at Fullscale. He is one of our, I don't know, Jerel, what do we call you? Product manager, product wizard? I don't know what to call you. And that's what we're going to talk about today is what is the difference between a product manager, a product owner, a project manager, a chief product officer? Like, what do these people do? And how are they used in a software development team? Why are they valuable? Why do we need them? How do we work with them? That's what we're going to talk about today. So Jerel is our expert here. And Jerel, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be back here again. I'm just going to say back because we did a dry run of this on like a separate topic. But okay, I digress. Hi, I'm Jerel, and I'm the Director of Product Management for Fullscale Ventures. And today we're going to talk about, as Matt mentioned, what the heck is product management, and what's the difference between product ownership, product management, and what does this look like once you progress in the career ladder. And I often like to tell the story with in contrast to its often misunderstood like twin, like project management, because it's something that sounds so similar, but I'd say couldn't be more further apart. In most teams, they actually sit at the opposite side of the table. And Matt, I just can't wait to get into this. I'm very excited on like this particular topic. How do you want to go about this?
From my experience of running engineering teams for the last 20 plus years, project managers to me are like completely useless. I feel like they show up to the meetings and all they could really do is check the check boxes of like, did we do this thing? Did we not do this thing? Is it, how are we doing on the timeline of this? It feels like the same people that would be at a construction site that's trying to figure out, did we like get the steel rebar? Did we install the, concrete? Like, where are we with these things? But they don't actually accomplish any of the work. They're just asking you if you did the work. And guess what? I can tell Jira if I did the work. Like, I can go to Jira and track the status of the ticket, and I don't need the project manager anymore. I mean, that's always been my feeling. I don't feel like a lot of scrum masters and project managers don't provide a lot of value, but I do think product owners and product managers provide a lot of value. So, Jerel, what is your take on that? How do you differentiate the difference?
I love this because you're actually hitting it right on the nail. The way I look at this is project management is an artifact of an older ways of working. Like, you still see it more relevant in like corporate setups. Like, imagine this when you're building a large corporate project and you are the goal of a project manager is just to eliminate waste in delivery. And the reason why it's a totally different role is because project managers typically take in the requirements from a business analyst or a solution architect in that context. And as someone who worked in construction, you're hitting it really, really close to home here when you mentioned that that's what a project manager does, where you're just checking in the box and ensuring the timely delivery of things. A project manager manages like the delivery of scope, timeline, and ensuring that there is no waste to it. But that's totally different when you start to work with software teams. And this is like the difference between like managing the scope and creating the scope. This is why I said that they sometimes sit at the opposite side of the table. And does that make sense?
In fairness, though, I think it depends on the type of company. If I'm being fair, if you're at, let's say, a construction company and you have a little software development team at the construction company, they're not necessarily building a product. They are managing some project. Like, hey, we're building some software. We need to get these projects done. We're not really doing product work. Like, and we'll talk more about what the difference is. But I could see at some companies where they're not really building a product. They don't really have a product manager. They don't really have a product team. They are genuinely like little projects. The other thing I could say about maybe a project manager is more useful in a larger organization is they might be the people that are just helping do the orchestration across the organization, across teams. They're like, I'm not responsible for any of the work. My job is to sit in, make sure that we're making progress, and go report it back to some PMO or some other higher level. So I can see that too in a larger company, but in a smaller company, I feel like it'd be the person with the, the board checking things off on the piece of paper, and like they don't provide a lot of value. In some companies, I could see it in fairness, but when you're building a product, it's different, right?
Yes, and I want to hone in on that, and not just on the company, but also in the nature of the work. In the case of construction, like changes at the middle of the project are very expensive because the budget is fixed, and the homeowner only has like this amount of money to execute on this project. And if they suddenly want a bigger kitchen or another extension, that's very expensive to change in the middle. Now, this is where like most of the failed expectations or pain comes in. When you put someone with a project management mindset into a product management role, it leads to a lot of pain and I'd say failed expectations, because in product management, especially when you're building products, you need to iterate fast and you need to like change things in the middle by showing it to the customer. And that's just not possible in traditional things or like in bigger context, like in a corporate or in construction where you don't really want to change things in the middle. In project management, it's totally reverse. You want to show it to the customer, to your expected users as soon as possible, so you can change and be nimble. Now, with that, it's the fundamental nature that's different, and this is why like there's a lot. It came to a point that I had to talk to my head of recruitment and say, "Hey, we need to stop putting people with long project management experience into or product management positions, like in interviewing them, because it was just so it takes a bit longer to transition them into product management role. And this is a little bit hard to understand because the role 10,000 feet up looks a lot similar. And if you talk to the people, they kind of talk about the same thing. But if you look at the nature of the things behind it, it couldn't be more further apart. So now, like, what is product management? How do we actually define this? Now, the way I define product management and the role of a product manager, it's the person responsible for figuring out what to build, figuring out what is the best thing to build at the right time to make the most impact. And they typically own three things. And this is where I introduce my abbreviation, Matt. It's the CPO. A product manager owns either or all of these three things. Like, you own the customer, you own the problem, and ultimately you own the outcome. You own the outcome of the development. And this is why you see a lot of posts on LinkedIn, like, the role of a product manager is so hard, you don't get celebrated, you don't really create code, you don't really sell, you don't really design. What do you actually do? You own the outcomes. And when the work of everyone, when you collect everyone's work and you actually make something meaningful, and assuming you did all of the invisible work behind it, you increase the chances of that. And you get to like be in front of it and like bask in the glory of a successful outcome because you did all of the invisible work in the middle. And that's why it's so hard to teach, but at the same time so meaningful. Like, there's no course teaching this in my country, Matt, in the Philippines, and I'd say all over the world, no one's figured out how to teach this, but everyone's looking for it. There's a lot of job openings, and there's like a major gap there that I'd say we're still figuring out. But
it takes a lot of creativity, problem solving, critical thinking.
Exactly.
It takes a unique set of skill sets, and the best product managers, honestly, are startup founders, right? They're 100%. People that have they're people like me that like, oh, I have the product vision for what I want to build. I understand who the customer is. I understand the problem. I understand the outcome because I understand how we need to solve the problem. And that's why a lot of startups are so successful, right? Especially if they have a CTO that also knows how to build the software, maybe even write the code. Like, that's where this like mythical 10x software developer comes from, because they know what needs to build and they can go build it and they can move very quickly, right? And that's why we talk a lot about.
I love that perspective. Yes, I
product
really love the
engineering
perspective.
on this channel and the importance of developers understanding the product side of things, right?
Yes.
But now you get into a larger company, the founder can only scale so much, right? So my first company, eventually we had 300 employees, and originally we had no product team. I was, me and the other CEO were basically the product team. Like we had the product vision.
Yeah.
But eventually it's like,
It's
hey,
founder-led.
different parts of the software had to have like a product owner or a product manager that had to like start taking ownership of the different parts and federating it out. And it's hard to hire those people. It's hard to hire them that have like the industry experience or product experience. It could even like step in day one and be like, okay, now I own this. Like I have to be the owner of how the product does, whatever the feature is, whatever the business unit is. It's a hard role to step into. So back to your point earlier, like how do people get into this job? Like how did you get into this job?
So I'm a huge fan of what you just said, Matt, like of that school of thinking in product management that and it roots down to its core of what a product is in software. It's that the most successful product managers are those that come from startup background, and it's a two-way street. Like when I started this community in Cebu, we call it product practitioners, and we talked about product management. My best answer on how can you get started with startup, it's learn how can you get started with products. It's to learn how to build a product as a startup. You can do this anywhere, wherever you are. And how I personally got into product management was actually to solving a problem that I know I faced. The company that I was working on, it was a construction company. I was in tech back then, and we were having like a problem with digital records. It was a micro company, but we had like this whole paper trail of like purchasing records. And I said, hey, there must be a better way of doing this. And what if we build a mobile app that you can manage the entire finance here, from requisition to purchase order? And that's how I got.
You had to take ownership of going to figure it out.
Yes, 100%. You have, and that's the key. I'd say that's the key. It's important in all roles, as you mentioned, in engineers. This is how you separate an engineer from a product engineer. It's that figuring it out thing, and why is this important to build. And I'd say it is even more important if that's your whole job, like as a product manager. And I saw this problem that we faced, and I thought, hey, more people must face this problem, because this is not just this is something that I believe more people are solving in many different ways. Now, collecting all of that experience into like all of those perspectives and trying to actually solve this problem at scale. Now that's like the core essence of product management. A project would solve this particular problem for the company I'm working on. Like I'm going to create a project. It's a collection of tasks, and I'm going to solve this problem for my company. And I would call it a project. But when you start thinking about solving this particular problem for not just for this company, but for all the companies like this, now you're creating a product. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And another way of looking at it, so what is a product with this definition? A product scales value delivery without scaling the cost. So, and there are only a couple of scenarios that really enable this. And one is software. Since we don't have to keep rebuilding things, this is why it's so important for product managers to get this right. Because if we do this right, it's expensive to build, but cost nothing to run. And there's this analogy that I came about with, Matt, in a book called The Pricing Roadmap. Like applications, mobile apps, products, they're very much like the trains in the 1800s in America. They cost a lot to build, but they cost nothing to run. So how do you price such a thing, and how do you go about like discovery of it?
Yeah,
and this is like a very wonderful problem that I actually got to think about. So just wrap it up, like the difference of like a project from a product is a project is solving something in front of you, and that's the end of it. And a product is solving this problem not just for you, but also for everyone else who might solve this problem. And that's like the beauty of startup, like you can do something in the middle of like an island in the Philippines, in the four corners of your room, and you can solve many people's problem across the world. And that's like the economy of scale with it.
I think another way to describe this, when you think about project management versus the product side, is sort of output versus outcomes, right? When you're focused on a project, you're focusing really on the output of whatever the project is. Where when you're building a product, you're much more focused on the outcomes to your end users, right? Like, why are we building this software? It's not to just ship the code and check the box, right? Which is like a lot of project management. It's about, how did we help the customer? How do we go tell the customer about this awesome thing we did, get their feedback and improve, right? Like, that part of it is very different as well. And that's something we talk a lot about on this channel is, you know, how do we get the developers thinking that way? How do we get the developers thinking about the outcome of their work? We don't want the developers to think their code is the product. Like, their code is the output, but that needs to also be an outcome to the customer, right? And that's very important, and that's part of the big difference here. So let me ask you this. So we talk about a product manager, and like you serve as a product manager for us with some new products that we're building at full scale. Like on the venture side, we're launching our own a startup, and you're helping run that, figure, okay, how do we build this? How do we design it? How do we talk to the market, figure out what the market wants? Like, you're doing all that great work, right? What is a product owner? What is the difference between a product manager and a product owner? How would you define the difference there?
Yeah, so I'd like to clarify the terminology here and why did the term product owner exist. So it's a role in Scrum, and the formal definition of a product owner is that they represent the business interests in the Scrum team. So they own the as I mentioned before, a product manager or a product leader owns three things, like the customer, the problem, and the outcome. Now, the product owner's role is to be part of the Scrum team and represent that daily. Now, where does this separate from a product manager? The best definition and what I find work best in teams is a product manager is responsible for strategy, where we think about the go-to-market strategy, taking in all of the inputs and prioritizing the business interests. And then, like, the product owner
outward role too, right? It's more of an external outward role.
Yes. You really need to get out. So one of the things that really set me up for success in my career is that, like, when you're building something, let's say, this was from my non-profit experience, when I'm building something for this set of people, don't just spend time on your desk. Actually try to talk to these people. This was before the pandemic, so I had like delivered the privilege of going out and talking to them. And this is why I'd say the product management role is an outward facing experience. You figure out like the go-to-market strategy, like what are the business priorities for
product
the
marketing.
next quarters. Yes, product marketing. And just like a fun fact about this, product management actually comes from like Procter and Gamble, and they were talking about like the marketing side of it more, and like brand marketing and all of that. And there's still lot of similarities, because if you figure out the right formula, you can scale that across the country, across the span of like your market. But it's hard to like, if you do it wrong, you're gonna end up with a product that doesn't sell. So that's very expensive to do a rollback on. So there's still some similarities towards product management as we see it today, but right now it's a lot faster. You need to get it out of your users, actually talk to the users, and define like all of these key things. Now, if that's the product manager, the product owner represents that and fills in the gap. So this is our priority. This is the problem. This is how we define it. Now, how do we break that down? And in operations, we can see like the product manager is going to write the product requirement document. This is a long piece of document that the product manager writes with a couple of key stakeholders. And then the product owner can then take that product requirement document and break that down into epics, stories, and tasks for the team to digest. So that's it in the technical operational terms. In a high level perspective, yeah.
And I would say from an engineering perspective, from my side, having a product owner, working with me or in the teams is nice, because they become the sounding board for the rest of the engineers. So the engineers aren't sure, like, how are we supposed to do this? Who is going to use it? Like, why are we doing this? Like, they become that proxy person that you can talk to, that's embedded in the team. They, like you said, they show up at the Scrum meetings or stand-ups on a regular basis, and they can help ensure on a day-to-day basis, is everybody thinking about this the right way? Are we making the right decisions? Is it aligned with like overall goals, and helping figure out problems that come up, right? I think product owners can be really, really valuable from that perspective. And a lot of them can act as like a mini product manager, right? They're like, yes, I've worked on this, part of the product for a long time. I've worked in this team for a long time. I understand what the product does. Like, I'm an expert at what the product's supposed to do.
Yeah.
Where the software engineers, a lot of times tend to be more heads down in the code and they're not thinking as much about product. And these product owners really help fill that gap. But one thing I want to talk about, though, is we need the software developers thinking more about product, right? Like, that's a big part of our issue, though. And I would say as time goes on with AI, software developers are going to have to. I think software developers are going to slowly have to evolve to be mini product owners, right? If the AI can write, 80% of the code, that means they've got to be much more involved with why are we writing this? And honestly, I think that's the way software development was 25 years ago. When I started my career, we didn't have product owners. We didn't have project managers. We didn't have product managers. We didn't have any of this. We had developers. You would talk to the developer, and the developer would figure out what to build, and they would go build it. Like, it was a different cycle. And I think what we saw over the last 20 years is IT and software development like really grew, got really big, especially in these large companies. That just didn't scale very well. Right. In a massive company and in more SaaS companies, we had to create over time these roles of product manager and product owner and all this kind of stuff. But the question now is AI comes in, are we going to slowly see that continue to change? We're going to have to see it change.
100%.
What is your take on that?
So it's also, I come from the product management perspective, and I see not just like other roles evolve into like being more involved in the product, but also how product management is actually evolving. And I'd say the key here is just trying to understand the role of a product, and what you're saying here, like the engineers and product engineers now need to think about why these things are getting built. Where I see the market is heading is like the product managers and like the product leaders are actually venturing into like this new space of general management. Like, PMs are becoming GMs. That's one of the key market trends we're seeing. And another one is like the PMs are like in more buckets than one. There's this talk from Lenny's summer camp like conference that product management is dead, and how do we see this changing? And ultimately that talk boils down like product managers. The time for the generalist product manager is dead. We need now specialists and into a pricing specialist, a marketing specialist, a 0 to 1.
Well, in a big company, that's true.
And all of that. Yeah.
In a big company, that's true. In a small company, that you don't have those resources.
You can. But you need a startup PM. That's a different type of flavor PM. You don't common hiring mistakes here. If you hire a corporate PM into a startup environment, you're gonna be faced with a lot of headache with that. Because they're just used to the different ways of thinking. Yeah.
Product managers in a much larger established company might spend a whole quarter trying to figure out if they change a button from blue to green and the results that come from it.
Yes.
I mean, that's the reality. Like, product managers at that level are looking at things like usage of the product, increasing usage of the product. How do we get more revenue per user, right? Think about somebody that's like Spotify or something like that. Like, how do we get more people to download more podcasts or listen to more music or whatever, right? That's also like part of the product team. So product, to your point, product in a larger companies means a lot of different things. Like, the product team can do a lot of different things. And, in some companies I've been involved with, it's like they spend a lot of time talking to industry analysts and doing that kind of crap, or helping marketing, going to trade shows and being kind of the product expert, or involved in sales, kind of involved like a sales engineer, almost like involved in sales conversations. Like, product can do a lot of different things. I think there's been a great conversation about product owners and product managers. There's one other thing I want to talk about is we talk about how this affects engineering. Like, I think product owners are really great. I think product managers are really great. I think as time goes on, all this is going to have to change. Engineers are going to have to be more and more involved in product, having a product mindset. And we already know it helps them produce a better outcome, right? It helps them think less about the code and architecting the world's best code, and getting them thinking more about how do I build the best product for the customer, and having that be my driving focus. We know that's important no matter what, but I definitely think AI is going to continue to change that. And somebody gave me a great another one of our podcast guests worked at AWS, and he was talking about how even though he worked at Amazon Web Services, he didn't really have a product manager that was supporting him. He was forced, even at Amazon, like go on Twitter, find customers, find out what they need, find how it could help, solve their problems, improve the product. And he talked a lot about, it was one of our episodes, about how much that helped him grow. And he was, instead he's like, I was much more focused on the code and trying to improve the code and improve how we did this. Like the product to me was the code versus like, man, I had to go talk to all the customers. I had to figure all this out. It has such a different mindset shift. And my point here is product managers are really important, but what you don't want is all the software engineers hiding behind them. You don't want the product manager to be the only one who gets the voice of the customer. The only one that has that lens. And nobody else in the company does, because then you are only as good or as bad as that one product manager. And maybe you are anyway. Yes. But you want other people to be exposed to this, right? Like the engineers might see some feedback and be like, oh yeah, I know exactly that feature. I know about that bug. I know about that thing. And maybe the product manager doesn't even know, like, because it's more technical, nuanced sort of thing, right? Yeah. Point is, like, product managers are important, but you don't want to hide everybody else in the company behind them. Like they need to also be exposed to these feedback loops from the customer. Getting, all this part of it is still equally as important to me. I think is really important.
Yeah. And I believe in this, Matt. And the way that I see this as a PM interacting in many different teams is that there's this one or two engineers that you come across once in a while that just gets it, like it's easier to communicate to them, like, hey, this is what we need and why. And then when you actually start to build things, they can fill in the gaps. And I think this is to your point earlier of like the product engineers are becoming more of like the PO role. Like they can fill in the gaps from like the PRD, and it's a much crucial role as we go about, because the faster everyone is, the more everyone is aligned on the why are we building this, the more everyone understand the three things, the three core fundamental things, is just who is the customer, what's the problem we're solving, and what's the core outcome that we're building. The better and the faster we deliver. And like I would say that's the entire like a huge chunk of like the role of a product manager is to get everyone to align on that. And like the product engineer here, Matt, that like, from my experience working with like great engineers here, I would say the reason that they really stand out, that I still remember them like in my many past lives, it's that they understand one or all of those three things. Like we're building this because of this customer, and this is their problems, and this is our desired outcome. Now this is this is something simple, but this is a little bit of a fundamental shift of like from how we're teaching software engineering, which is like optimization and like building and how are we building things. This is the why are we building things. It's the customer, the problem, and the outcome that we want out of it.
I love that. The CPO, Chief Product Officer, but
CPO.
It's also those things. Yeah.
Yes.
It's those things. Absolutely. Well, Jerel, thank you so much for being on the show today. Thank you for all your hard work at Full Scale. We have an amazing team.
Exciting things coming up.
Working for our clients, but Jerel is also helping me build our own product. So stay tuned for that. There'll be some more announcements about a new product that we're building that like some of you will be able to use. So excited about that.
Yes.
So thanks for doing this today, Jerel.
Thanks for having me, Matt. Peace.
All right. Thank you. Before we wrap up today's episode, we have a special resource for you if you're looking to elevate your development team to have more of a product-driven mindset. I have a fantastic free ebook about turning your code-first team into a product-first team. Please go to fullscaleteam.com/product-first-teams to download this free ebook. There's also a link in the show notes. Thanks for listening to Product Driven, and we'll see you in the next episode.